Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to give it a few minutes for people to join. Thank you for joining, everyone. You know, it takes a minute for those Zoom waiting rooms to let people in. So we'll just give it a few minutes of time to make sure we can start with everyone in the room. But thank you so much for joining. I am Caitlin Harper. I will be your moderator today and friend, hopefully. And then we have Naj Austin, who you probably all know, CEO of Somewhere Good. As we are waiting for people to enter, though, please place in the chat where you're tuning in from. Love to see where everyone is coming from. I'm currently tuning in from San Francisco.
I'm tuning in from Brooklyn.
Love that. Already bi-coastal. We have Bay Area, Cambridge, Atlanta, from New York but live in Oakland, Bed-Stuy, Boston, love that. Queens, Southern California, more Atlanta, San Diego, already from all over the country. All right. Well, as people keep joining, we're going to kick off. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are tuning in from. And welcome to our first Somewhere Good webinar. I am your host, Caitlin Harper, and welcome to our speaker, Naj Austin, CEO of Somewhere Good. Hi, Naj. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Yep. It's still morning for me, I guess. Hi, super excited to be here and to share more with you all.
Yeah, no, someone has to be on mute at least once, not knowingly during every webinar, or it was not a webinar.
And knowing me, it may happen again. So, bear with me.
No, not a problem at all. I'm sure I will do it once or twice throughout today too. But besides muting, we are also going to be talking about reconnecting neighbors and neighborhoods, harnessing technology to foster deeper local connections. Before we get started, I'm going to run through the agenda quickly because we are going to go through a lot today. So I am going to hand it over to Naj to present an awesome deck for you all. We will then segue into a fireside chat. And then after that, we're going to flip the script and we're actually going to be asking you some questions. So get ready to be interactive. After that, we'll wrap up with some Q&A. Feel free to put your questions in the chat throughout this session. Don't feel like you have to wait till the end. I'll be logging them, messaging you individually, and asking if you want to unmute to join the conversation. We're so excited to hear from you, so please participate at any time. All right. With that, before we start with these awesome slides, I am going to ask Naj a few quick fire questions just to get to know her a little bit better. Sound good, Naj?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. First question, how do you center joy in your life?
Oh, that's a strong one to start with. I cook a lot. I have a dinner that I do every Sunday called the Sunday Series Dinner, where I invite over someone I've been meaning to get to know better, and I cook in the kitchen for about 6 to 8 hours, depending on the menu. And I know to some people that sounds like labor, but to me, it is one of the main ways that I center joy in my life.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I love that idea. I think mine would more like center around Easy Mac for friends I haven't seen in a long time, but I love that idea. Okay. Second question, how do you build and find community in your life?
Outside of building a platform that does that, which I would say takes up a huge chunk of my life, I'm also on my community board in my neighborhood. So if anyone in the chat lives in Brooklyn, specifically Flatbush, specifically District 17, I am one of your local representatives, so hi. And that is a way in which I connect with people that I feel like are outside of my almost like tech bubble, right? New York City is so diverse across almost every type of identity, socioeconomic status, et cetera, age, religion. And that's a reminder and a way for me to step outside of that, or I guess step into that. And the way that I prefer to interact is through things like trash pickup or like tie-dye with the kids. It's sort of this reminder of like pure innocence that I think when you scroll too much on TikTok and Twitter, you can forget exists. So it's a good reminder to tap back into the world around me.
I love that. That's a strong community answer for sure.
Yeah.
It's so easy, how you said, to fall into just like the bubble of your day to day versus reaching outside of that. So third question, and then I'm going to pass it to you. Where is your favorite place to hang out in your neighborhood?
My favorite place to hang out in my neighborhood is probably the park. I live near Prospect Park, and near my entrance is a lake where there are these two swans who are in love. So sometimes when I'm having a dark, sad day, I'll go try to find the swans. They're always there, but when I do, it's like, I'm like, hey guys, it's me again. That's probably one of my favorite places to hang out in my neighborhood.
I love that. We always joke
Yeah.
that park hangs are a West Coast thing. So nice to see you coastal. All right. Well, thank you for answering all of my questions. I know they were really difficult, but we'll jump back into some more fireside chat questions at the end. But if you want to kick things off with reconnecting neighbors and neighborhoods.
Totally. Give me 1 second. So I believe everyone can see my screen. Am I correct?
You are correct.
Great. So before I dive in, I want to share that for me, I know I'm presenting, but I want it to feel more like a conversation and for it to feel sort of thoughtful. And as Caitlin mentioned, interactive. So in the chat, if things resonate, please make note of that or drop that. Or if you have a question or a moment of inspiration, I want this to be collaborative as much as possible in sort of this Zoom format. So let's get into it. This talk is around reconnecting neighbors and neighborhoods, exploring thoughtful technology, foster better better local connections in our cities. It's something I think about a lot. As I mentioned, I obviously have a tech company called Somewhere Good, which is why we're here. But I also build and nurture community in a variety of ways in my personal life. So a bit about me. My name's Naj Austin, pronoun she, her. I live in Brooklyn, New York, as I mentioned, and my work lies at the intersection of community, space, identity, and joy. The products I build bring people closer to themselves and one another. Prior to starting Somewhere Good, I had a company called Apples Club, which was a creative co-working space designed for people to tap into passions and play. Due to COVID, that had to sort of take a break. And by break, I mean, we fully shut it down. But in that, saw an opportunity to bring people together through a different sort of undertaking of what third spaces could look like in cities around the world. So today I'll be talking and sharing more about how Somewhere Good is disrupting how and where we hang out in our cities. So I'm starting with the question or the statement that I share the most when I sort of do my spiral on why are we lonely? Why are we sad? Why are, depression and anxiety on the rise? And I'll often say it's probably the phones. I think obviously, and there's an asterisk there in case anyone has, extra thoughts, because I do as well. But in sharing that, smartphones by themselves don't force you to stop hanging out in person, but I think there are several reasons why they reduce how and when we spend time with one another. Obvious things like they're a distraction. People often go on their phones instead of paying attention to the people and the world around them. These are all things we know. Phones literally provide almost like a behavioral nudge of sorts, right? Instead of texting a friend to maybe hang out, you're probably just going to stay on your phone and just text them or go on TikTok, which I will always admit in these conversations is my dark space I go to. Instead of going to the park to watch the swans, I maybe spend way too much time on TikTok. And third, in-person interaction is a network, right? If 20% of people would rather be on their phones, that reduces everyone else's options for in-person hanging out by 20%. And so you kind of create this loop in which people are stuck on their phones, using apps that aren't designed for genuine connection. We have remote work, which means more people are stuck literally at home on Zooms. Religious affiliation is low, and local gathering spots in traditional community spaces are disappearing. And so you sort of have this perfect storm in which loneliness is not only alive and dynamic, but it's being perpetuated daily. And then the note I always like to make is that loneliness, the way that I view and talk about loneliness in this conversation, is a New York Times definition for it, which is, quote, loneliness defined by mental health professionals is a gap between the level of connectedness that you want and what you have. I think we often have this view of loneliness as the person who's stuck in their room and it's dark and they have a hoodie on and they're like on 4chan or something. Loneliness is often more perceived as a person in a crowded room who is unable to connect and talk with others and or be in touch with themselves. Two other notes on the sort of perfect storm around loneliness, we're stuck on our phones, anxiety, depression, etc., is also the rise of individualism and the impact of urbanization. I won't get into those two because they're so enormous in terms of societal norms that we've sort of perfected here in the US, but those also impact how and when we spend time with one another. Which prompts a very elusive question, I think, that I've been trying to solve in many ways over the last 4 years, which is how can we bring people together, right? I've given you a list of reasons why it's really hard. I'm going against TikTok, people don't want to leave their house, remote work, these real reasons, but things that are almost, I think, important to me as an individual, but also as a builder and a creator, is to take really sticky problems and believe that I can be the person to figure it out alongside a very smart team. One of those thoughts is when we spend more time with our neighbors, a couple of amazing things happen. There's a stronger sense of belonging and safety. There's improved mental and physical well-being. There's increased community resilience, enhanced cultural exchange, happier aging. I mean, everything goes up into the right, for lack of a better metaphor. And in that gap between being stuck on our phones and being with community, I see a notion of opportunity to try and figure it out. Which is the question of the day. Imagine technology as a portal and not a place. We use technology as a place to spend time. I think a lot about that because we live in a vibrant, dynamic world and we spend our literal time in these places, in these digital spheres. And when building Somewhere Good, we thought a lot about how can we use technology as a tool? It should get you to where you need to be to then go outside. Other phrases we would use is, how do you use technology to help people tap into the world around them? How do you have social technology promote face-to-face interactions, empower shared experiences, uplift local businesses, and spread joy? I would say those are generally the 4 values of Somewhere Good that we're constantly playing with in terms of features and how we think about sort of the roadmap for the company. We think a lot about how to consciously prioritize in-person interaction as a much needed alternative to phone addiction, underline and build that. We think a lot about how Hangouts used to be something that everyone just naturally did because, well, if you wanted human contact, you had to do it that way. So how do we use almost that inherent human want and need and give people an easy way to tap in and find that? Think a lot about the impact of how bringing people outside of their homes impacts local small businesses, right? You have people who you've engaged, you've energized them to say, I'm going to get off TikTok, I'm going to go outside, and sort of then what? And in that, we think a lot about if the problem of disconnection between, the local community and or a person who wants to be outside and the small business is not solved, that also has a negative effect on the economy. And so going back to the somewhere bad vision, which is we're all inside scrolling and not outside sort of supporting these local establishments, those sort of mom and pop spaces in which we love will all turn into Bank of Americas. And I do not want to live in a neighborhood composed of banks and Starbucks, but rather places that inspire curiosity and joy and are, run and led by real people. Which is why we built Somewhere Good. So finding people and things to do locally that bring us closer to ourselves should be simple. I've said that in many ways today. And right now in this current moment, there are very few, if any, companies that prioritize both identity, discovery, and socialization in a thoughtful way that brings people together with others nearby while supporting local spaces. And so the magic of Somewhere Good is not only in the connectivity aspect, which is you want to hang out, so does person A. Now you can do that easily. But more so, the magic lies in the fact that we have a roster of spaces that we partner with who also understand the importance of third spaces and bringing people together. When we were sort of doing some user research and asking people, why don't you hang out in your neighborhood? What's sort of the blocker there for you? The two biggest things that came up were, I don't know where to do it. And how do I tell people about it? I'll post on my Instagram, but that's just to my friends, and maybe they live nearby me, and maybe they don't, and now I'm spiraling, and now I'll just say on TikTok. And so we wanted to create a way that it removed all of that sort of agita, right? You can create a hangout on Somewhere Good. It goes live to over we have about 16,000 people who use the Somewhere Good platform. Obviously, I'd say 10,000 live in New York City specifically. You say, we could use one of these hangouts, which are all real ones. You could do a book club around music and sound. It would let folks who are interested in that know, who live nearby. And then when you create that, we link you to a physical location that we book automatically. So we handle the partnerships with spaces. We let them know, hey, we're going to send really cool, interesting people to your space in the way that you like. And so if you're a bookstore, let's say maybe a Greenlight bookstore, which I don't know if most folks know that spot in Brooklyn, they want book clubs, they want writing workshops, that's it. We say, okay. And so when people make those hangouts, we direct them accordingly, taking off that lift for local spaces as well. And then obviously bringing people to the space in which they are in a bookstore, they spend money, they know the staff there, they have a great time, and then they come back. This is sort of the larger vision of that. And I like to share it to show that we hold both sides of this equally. We hold space for people who are looking for one another, and we hold space for the businesses who can't find the people to spend time in their space. And I think it's important to talk about local businesses for a couple of reasons. Post-COVID, well, I'll start here. As a company that had a physical space when COVID happened, I had a lot of friends and peers who also had physical spaces. And I will say that about 90% of them no longer have that physical space. COVID was a really, really hard hit for a lot of local businesses. And I know that we all know that anecdotally, right? You've seen places you maybe loved or spent time at close, but the numbers are actually very staggering. And so as a response to that, it was important for me to ensure that local businesses were able to not only survive, but thrive, and give them an opportunity to focus on their business while we help them focus on community, consumers, people. We handle all of that so that they can ensure that they can continue to pay rent, that they can ensure that, prices go up in New York City for real estate, that they're able to kind of stay there. Again, I said this earlier, but I really don't want to live in a neighborhood full of Bank of Americas. That's not what makes New York City special. And so we want to be the best way to know what's going on in your neighborhood, meet up, hang out, and really get to know the cool spots nearby that make neighborhoods vibrant. We see it as a win-win for everyone involved. Spaces get ritualistic foot traffic of returning any neighbors. Neighbors gain a third space to hang out. Everyone is happier. More people are going outside where your money is being spent. Is in a potentially more thoughtful manner than before. And I think also there's something about the nuance in how spaces know their community, right? Back in the day, you would go into a store and the book clerk would say, I know exactly what book to refer you. I remember which ones you purchased. I know your name. I know your birthday's coming up. We've lost that a bit. And we think often at Somewhere Good, this idea of returning back to the way in which we spend time in our neighborhoods, and again, using technology as a portal to get there. In this sort of discovery component of helping people discover shared rituals at local places, Somewhere Good actually has our own physical space in Brooklyn where we tested out a lot of these theories. It felt right, but I love to experiment and make sure things feel right for real before rolling them out. So we do have a physical space located in Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn, New York, and the space is designed truly as a third space. On the weekends, Friday through Sunday, 12 to 7, it's completely free to hang out, and that's all you do there. People come in and they want to co-work because we see a table and a chair and Wi-Fi and we just can't help ourselves. And we love to encourage people to think outside of labor, to think about what it means to just sit, rest, find joy, talk to a neighbor, stare at a wall, put a puzzle together, which has been interesting from an education perspective because people tend to fight that feeling, right? We sort of see ourselves as little engines that need to be constantly putting out work. And Somewhere Good is a reminder that maybe we don't have to do that all the time. One of the things that is important to know when you think about the type of hangouts that Somewhere Good is prioritizing is outside of the traditional lens of events. On the one side of events, I'd say that those are traditionally very produced. You have a host, there's potentially AV, there's a microphone. I mean, it's kind of a production. Somewhere Good hangouts are low-key, intimate, and meant to feel like as if it was your living room, but a little bit bigger, with maybe a nicer couch. That center these themes, right? Hangouts are meant to connect people deeply with other folks that are like-minded, to create habitual shared practices, to prioritize multiple identities, and to center around hobbies, cultures, and passions. So not where you work, not what you do for work, not who you are as a worker, but what really drives you. What are you curious about? What do you want to know more about in the world? What have you been wanting to discover, and to be able to explore that more? And then the last one's really interesting, which is an alternative to traditional nightlife. I'd say as we've had hangouts for the last 3 to 4 months, this component comes up the most from users as something that they love about Somewhere Good hangouts. The idea that it's not centered around drinking, that it's not centered around nightlife or partying, but more so a park hang, a midday crochet club, a book club at 3 o'clock. This idea that our lives can and should be so much fuller. And again, the problem is that when we don't have the spaces to realize that vision, we think that it doesn't exist. And Somewhere Good is a reminder that it absolutely does. And we want to make it easy for people to realize that for themselves. And this is sort of the question that I think about every night before I go to bed. And so I figured I'd bring it to you all so you can think about it before you go to bed. But how can we bring our cities back to life? As I mentioned, the small business market in the US is vast, with over 30 million small businesses currently operating, but those businesses shut down if people don't spend time there. And it's important to both spend time and money, because awareness and returning foot traffic is just as important as buying a book every week. The 4 components that shape how I believe we can bring our cities back to life, which do not have to be the same as other people, but I think those 4 things are promoting local economic growth. That one feels a little bit obvious. Building strong and engaged communities. That one feels obvious, but can be the hardest. Fostering social well-being and sustainability. And so this idea, again, of when we return back to places, we care for them more. And then I think the biggest one, which, this is both solved from a sort of private company level, public level, civic level, but to make third spaces more accessible. When we have third spaces in which we can hang out and care for them, there's a sense of ownership that people in the community have. When we feel like spaces are meant for us to visit and leave, you lose that sense of relationship to space, and we want to help bring that back in some way. I'll end with this. I think that, Somewhere Good's mission is underpinned by this belief that the power of local community is rooted in the people that live there. And as someone who, again, is a community board member, So I see it on that level, and obviously through Somewhere Good. There's often a gap in how people feel like they can show up in their community. And if anything, I encourage people to think about how they show up in their community a bit more. And that can look like being conscious of different laws that are being passed in your neighborhood or city. And it can also be a trash cleanup, and it can also be going to a book club and meeting your neighbors. I think it's so varied and nuanced and multifaceted, and we have this sort of very, and we being the collective we, so very general, a very big generalization, have this view of community building as being very boots on the ground, grassrooty, which is true, and it can be that. But with Somewhere Good, we're asking people to think about it a little bit more subversively. What can it look like to empower small businesses by simply showing up and asking what they need? When was the last time that you walked into your hardware store and thought of it outside of a place to buy a hammer, and instead as a place to gather? Or who are the owners? How long have they been here? Are they struggling? What do they need? So this sort of, virtuous cycle of when the spaces are happy, the people spend time there, then the people are happy. Obviously, we're looking at software with technology, but we can't do everything alone. So together, we can reimagine how we can connect our neighborhoods and bring people closer to themselves and one another. I know we have a lot more to chat about, but I did want to share, if you want to stay in touch about Somewhere Good, there are 3 easy ways to do so. One, if you go to somewheregood.com, you'll find all the various hangouts that are currently happening in New York City. As I mentioned, we're growing at the speed of spaces that we partner with. And so right now we're focused on Brooklyn because, well, we have spaces in Brooklyn. We just brought on 2 spaces in Manhattan, which is super exciting. And we can move as quickly as the cities that we find a sort of mission aligned space that also believes in the power of community and third spaces, and then wants to use the Somewhere Good technology to make that happen in their space. But if you are in New York City, go to somewheregood.com. You can find various hangouts. I think I mentioned this, but all the hangouts in Somewhere Good are led by other community folks. We don't lead anything. We're strictly the technology. We make sure that you get your RSVP link, and that's kind of it. And everything else is led by community folks, which is really magical to see what happens again when people have a tool to imagine whatever they want. There are no constraints, asterisk. And then if you want to find us on Instagram, we're Somewhere Good World, and then on Twitter, Somewhere Good, alongside TikTok, where you'll see me making all types of interesting content for the kids, if that's your thing as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that, Naj. I know in the chat we have come to Philly, come to Toronto, come to Oakland, come. So I think you have a lot of spaces to hit next. As a reminder, add your, so many comments in the chat, but add your questions. After I finish mine, we're gonna flip it over to yours. So make sure you get your questions in there so we get them answered. All right, so thank you again for that presentation. It was awesome. I definitely want to go Somewhere Good. First of all, yes, I volunteer for sure. But I'm going to kind of go in order of how you presented things. So first on the topic of loneliness, how have you seen these physical spaces affect loneliness?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, Somewhere Good has a physical space in Bed-Stuy, and so we have sort of a firsthand look at the impact that gathering locally has. And it's transformative. I mean, people, well, one, something you should know is when I go to the Somewhere Good space, I don't tell people I'm the founder. I wouldn't call it spying per se, but you really get the good data. You're not getting the fancy, oh, you're the founder, I'm only going to say good things. So I kind of like to hear how people are moving and what they appreciate about the space. And often what I'll hear and what people will share with me is that they have maybe felt adrift in the city. They've been here for 1 year, 5 years, it doesn't matter, but this sort of like almost active, like I'm trying to figure out who I am. And in that, I'm looking through the lens of community and space and it's coming up empty. And Somewhere Good provides a space to say, maybe I am a reader who loves to garden, and I never knew that because, well, I never had the opportunity to figure that out about myself, and now I can. And so there's this sense of like, I wouldn't go all the way to helping people find their sense of purpose. I think that's a very strong statement to make, but I think getting people closer to that helps them feel closer to themselves. And again, in that act, you are more open to the world, you're more open to people, etc. And then the last thing I'll say is the way we designed the Somewhere Good space in Bed-Stuy was to be communal and collaborative. And so people come in and they're not on their phones, they're not on their computers. And so in that, they're talking to neighbors, they're learning new facts about the place in which they live, about the world. And I think that opens people up to how they move around the world as well. And so when you go back to this idea of loneliness, of am I connected to myself, am I connected to others, we feel like that, again, I don't like to use strong language like being solved, right? But I think in that moment, that person feels less lonely, which is the goal.
Yeah, no, I can say from personal experience, like moving across the country, like shifting environments as an adult, it is so difficult to find your people, your places, how to get your footing. And like, I can completely relate to that like loneliness feeling, and then finding spaces that alleviate that. So,
Absolutely.
next question, how do you find and vet these spaces that align with your mission?
Yeah, so we have a pretty, I'd say, simple policy. The spaces have to want to build community. If you are a space that's like, I could care less about community, you're probably not the right place for us. So we're inherently finding places that, one, have reached out. There's a lot of inbound requests of folks that see the types of hangouts that happen at Somewhere Good and say, how can this happen at my space? So that's a really quick, like, generally feels mission aligned. They want to bring community together. Community is important. We think about soft language. And so if a space comes to us and they say, they use a lot of like consumer like language, I wouldn't call it I maybe call it a pink flag. We want people to think about the people who come into their space as community, and maybe they're struggling to really nurture and grow that, but they see them as a garden of people to grow, less like dollar in, dollar out to kind of feeling and vibe. Obviously, that's not always easy to vet for, but right now, again, we're moving at the speed of collaboration and I'd say alignment around the aspect of like how important is community building to you on a scale of 1 to 5. And if it's 5, we're already aligned. And if it's more like 1, less aligned.
Yeah, the coffee shop that lets you sit there all day with the one coffee instead of making you buy
Yeah.
6 or 7 to stay there for
Exactly.
the day. I've got you.
Exactly.
All right. A lot of talk about tech, obviously, in this presentation, and AI chat GPT seem to be the only words in the media lately. How do you plan to use AI for Somewhere Good?
Yeah, so we've actually been using it in a almost accidental way. Well, it was accidental. Now it is quite purposeful. But when we were putting together Hangouts, and I see some folks who have questions about this in the chat, so it sort of answers that. But the first question we had was, anyone in the community can create a Hangout. How do we maintain the integrity of the Hangout so it always feels Somewhere Good? Obviously, we cannot be there. They're in different locations now. We have no wherewithal to sort of check in on that. So we had an idea of, for every Hangout that's created, of using generative AI to do that. And so what that looks like right now in this moment, if you leave this conversation and you live in Brooklyn or New York and you say, I want to create a Hangout, you'll go through a texting chatbot that we've created. And that texting chatbot uses generative AI to come up with the Hangout by using specific inclusive language that we've told it to use. And so, for example, if you say, I want to create a Hangout around books that I hate, the chatbot's going to maybe refer you to something a little bit kinder. What about, books that you have a lot of questions about? And so trying to sort of maintain the language of how Hangouts are created. And the second component is, once the Hangout is created in whatever location you want it to be at, we have AI generated AI generated agendas that come along with every hangout. And that agenda is used to help guide the tone of the hangout. A lot of it, again, is hard coded into, or rather hard coded from the Somewhere Good ethos and how we sort of think about how hangouts should feel. And those feelings are always centered around, again, having a collaborative group activity or project in which deep bonds are made and sort of connected, kind of shifting from the sort of basic introductions again of like, where do you work, all of that, and sort of going deeper, faster, and sort of this safer way. And all that happens using AI. And so that speeds up the process because for us, again, using technology as a tool to make things faster, to make hanging out so easy that you can then just go and do it versus being belabored by, okay, what is it? Where is it? How will it go? The time? I mean, we remove all of that in about 5 minutes. You can have the hangout exactly where it is, exactly what time it is, exactly what to do. You can almost show up and give nothing if that's the energy you want. But we think about it as it frees people up to just be themselves without having to think about a lot of the logistic aspects of what it means to gather together.
I love that. It sounds like tech actually used for good or somewhere good.
Imagine that.
Imagine that. All right. I'm going to get to just 2 more questions and then we are going to flip the script and start asking you all some questions. Don't worry, I'm logging all of the questions that are coming in the chat and we will get to them at the end. How do Somewhere Good's values and mission affect your day-to-day life?
I think that I'm a child of 5, which I feel like is important for people to know. I'm the middle child, which means I was born into community. I never had a choice. That's just how my life is. And I think in that, I am someone who loves to gather. I have my Sunday dinners in which I gather. I'm on the community board in which I gather. And I think that in building Somewhere Good, it was a way for me to make that offering for other people, so that the value of being connected to people who I maybe have just met or people I've known forever, is such an integral part of my life that I want everyone to have that. Technology is the fastest way to put that into other people's hands. And so the values of Somewhere Good and my personal values are so intertwined that I think for better or worse, sometimes it feels very blurred. But I think all in a good way, it's all about making, again, people closer to themselves, closer to others, closer to the neighborhood in which they live, tapping into curiosity, joy, care, all of these things that, again, I think about often are the foundation of Somewhere Good.
1 of 5. Yeah, you really were born into community.
Yep.
But totally makes sense. Last question. What is next for Somewhere Good?
I think according to the chat, moving to other cities. Yeah, that is absolutely high in our list. We are moving with a sense of care, as I've mentioned, the spaces in which we partner with. When we partner with spaces, we also give them almost like a Somewhere Good starter box. And so they get conversation cards, they get markers and paint and sort of these things to help people interact at that space. And so there is a level of like, again, like participation in the space level, right? They have to be excited that now people are going to have postcard making sessions in which they mail it out to a friend that they've been meaning to talk to. I mean, you have to really want to do that. But we are moving at, again, the speed of collaboration with these other spaces. But I think that is the biggest focus, having our spaces in Brooklyn, adding these spaces in Manhattan, and then moving city by city, from interest to both the people who want to hang out there, but also the spaces themselves.
Great. Well, I know what's next for us, and that is asking some questions to the audience. So if you want to, yes, pull up your slide. So before we do our actual Q&A of the audience asking you questions, we wanted to ask you guys some questions, some thought starters. and get your opinion. So if you can turn your video on and make this as interactive as possible, we would love to hear from you. So Naj, if you want to run through this first question.
Sure. So the first question I had was, what would it look like for you specifically to deepen community bonds in your neighborhood? Do you want me to go through all of them, or should I start with that one?
I think we can start with the first one. And if
Okay.
you want to place in the chat or unmute yourself to dive into this question a bit, we'd love to hear from you. I know the first thing that came to mind to me was that I don't know like any of my individual neighbors at all.
Mm.
And the idea of just being able to like say hi in the hallway, or, hey, I have a package coming today. I'm not going to be here today. Would you mind looking out for it? That simple and useful style of communication, I feel like is kind of uncommon now, and would be so nice to have.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think is stopping you from saying hi?
That's such a great question. I think like there is the hi in the hallways, etc., but the engagement on both ends for longer conversations, it feels like a head down, everyone's always going somewhere. And I think that's like the hallway is not a place where people are gathering and hanging out. The hallway is a place where people are transitioning to where they are going next.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
But it looks like Andy wants to add something to this point.
Please.
Hey, so when I think of this question, I think of like approach. So I'll just like give like action items. But I think about community healing. So I love reading. I'm currently rereading All About Love by Bell Hooks, which is kind of giving language to everything. And I really like affirmation. So if I see something, I say something, whether it's liking someone's shirt or enjoying their smile. I love to just kind of humanize people and just like kind of be like, hey, look up, like I see you as a person, or just all that. The amount of times I walk by people, I'm like, I just like your spirit, and I walk away. Or it just opens a conversation, because I'm also an introvert, so it's very ironic when I say something and then I'm like, nah, I'm good, and keep going. But sometimes I'll stay. But I think just getting in the habit and seeing people consistently. I remember even one time I was just like, I see you around this neighborhood enough, we need to say hi to each other. So just people sometimes with kindness works.
And I think it's funny because it can be that simple of opening a door of conversation of, I like your shoes. Oh my gosh, I just got them for my birthday. Oh, when was your birthday? I'm an Aries too. And then you're now planning a mutual group birthday party. So I think that again, like, think about it as a small seed. And I feel like you're doing that. You don't have to become besties with everyone in your building unless you want to. If that is a goal of yours, by all means, good luck. But I think it often, we create this sort of bigger picture that it feels very exhaustive and never mind. But saying one small thing to someone in your building can change your relationship to them, to other folks. It makes you feel better, it makes them feel better. You've added some light and good energy to the world. I love that.
Yeah, I want to run into you, Andy. You said,
yeah, me too.
Hallway.
I was like, also, I do leave my house once in a while. So I do in the streets, I go to the supermarket. So it doesn't just need to be like in your apartment, you know?
Sure. Yep. Totally.
I think we have another comment from Ari. If you want to unmute yourself, there we go.
Hi. Yeah, I think it's sort of similar to what Andy said. It's just being being kind of like serendipitously connected to people. Like that's actually community. You don't always have to know their name or details about them, but sometimes it starts off by just like waving, then you strike up a conversation. Maybe you see that they need help with something. And I split my time between Bed-Stuy and Oakland. And that's actually something that I've noticed being here in New York. It was the first summer I had moved here, our car overheated in the middle of the Puerto Rican Day Parade. And so people emerged out of the woodwork and they helped us push this car out of the street. I don't know where these people came from, but they did. And I don't know that that's something that I see everywhere. So that like level, they're going to be like, hey, dummy, like, why didn't you take care of your car sooner? But they will help you. And so I think that's what actual community bonds look like. It's being kind, it's helping, it's kind of seeing when somebody has a need, and if you can help, jump in.
Absolutely. I love that.
Such a good story. Emily, it looks like your hand is raised too.
Hi, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was something that you said earlier about getting thinking away from labor as well, that made me think about like allowing people to be complex humans. Like, I like the idea of the gatherings. Like, it doesn't have to be your passion or like something that, you dedicate your whole life to. You can still be, a casual fan. And it made me think of, in terms of deepening community bonds, Ari and Andy both very connected. Like, the people that you introduce yourself to or meet, I think sometimes we get caught up, like, it doesn't have to become your best friend, but that can still be your community, right? Like, it's your barista and it's like, it's your place that, you are all part of that community. I think, at least in my experience, especially like peers of mine, and it's like in the upper 20s and trying to make friends in different places, like the pressure's like, oh, do we keep back and forth, like finding a coffee dates, like calendar times, and it's like it can be more casual, right? So community.
Totally. I jotted down 2 notes while you were talking. One, the creative director of Summer Good, Annika Hansen Azora, has written often about thinking about community and friendships as a garden, in which some things are seasonal and some things you grow because you're excited about, and some things you aren't anymore, and that's just natural and normal. And using that as a lens for how we build and nurture relationships, right? There are some friends, to your point, or some acquaintances or people in our community who are a barista, and you see them every morning between 9 and 9:30, and that is your relationship, and it doesn't necessarily need to expand to more than that. And then you sort of have the opposite side of that. And so I just wanted to affirm that, and I can send that article after, because I think it has it shaped how we think about what that connective moment is at a Summer Good hangout. Like, do these people need to walk away best friends, or is it really like, you are the person I talked to about World War II, and that's it, and we're in this contained type box, but it's my favorite box when I want to do that. Which speaks to also your thoughts on the hangouts and how we encourage anyone who has a curiosity to host one, in which I always use the World War II reference, because I am often World War II and often read books about it, like to talk about it, but like, I'm not a scholar, I'm absolutely not a professional, but I just want to be in conversation. And then the question becomes, where can I do that? How can I do that? So making like the chasing of curiosity, which can also close, right? You can be curious and be like, I don't want to know anything else about this. And that's also fine. It doesn't have to become your brand. You don't have to make TikToks about it. It's open and closed. And so I think that's definitely something that people want more of, but again, can be difficult to imagine into reality.
For the interest of time, I'm going to open it up to any of the 3 questions. So what would it look like to deepen community bonds in your neighborhood? Neighborhoods are built upon give and take. What do you take from the places in which you call home? And what do you give back? And then, can you share any unique or unexpected ways you've seen technology being used to foster connections in your own neighborhood or local community? So if you have comments on any of these now, feel free to raise your hands, put comments in the chat, etc. Because do want to hear from all of you, but also have some time for your questions as well. JR.
Hey, so yeah, I was gonna just respond to the first question. Yeah, I was just thinking about how like removing barriers can also help you deepen community bonds. So a barrier that I try to remove is like just like headphones. So when I leave my house and I'm walking around my community, I try to remove my headphones out of my ear, or if I'm in the vicinity of like my block or whatever, I just try to remove my headphones, because that is just a really, really simple way of just feeling a bit more connected to the people actually walking on the sidewalk, or the people who actually live on my block. And it opens up an opportunity to actually like speak to them, say good afternoon or just hello, whatever. That idea, but also thinking about safety too. I know that like a lot of people, like that's a big part of why they don't engage in knowing their neighbors or community. It's just like this idea of not feeling safe. And so I think that just kind of like trying to figure out ways of feeling more safe, and also spotting people who might be safe for you to engage with are things to think about.
I love both of those things. I think removing barriers, absolutely. And then also like looking up, like if you walk around your neighborhood and think about when have you actually just been looking at the world around you, I started to realize I was not looking up very often. And it's now become a practice in which I spend time outside, in which I'm like, wow, a new building, cool, a new juice shop, things that like, if again, I'm scrolling on Instagram or TikTok or on Gmail, I have no idea what's happening around me. And so I think there's also just an awareness of what's going on where I live that we also open ourselves up to. So thank you for sharing that.
Agreed. Great points. I find myself in that headphone mindset way too often.
Totally.
Nathan, I think you were next.
Hi, I'm answering the first question. And this is probably too idealized from my point of view, but I think it would help. It helps to know your neighborhood, that area where you're at, your community area, to know the bad things going on as well. Where is it crime, where is it in homelessness, or even though the economic side, like are the spaces that you see, are they locally owned or are they corporate? And kind of tailor your message in terms of connecting, knowing those facts. I think it's if you don't pay attention to that, you come off tone deaf and not connected at all. So that's what I think.
Totally. I think about this a lot from the community board perspective, in which I know everything going on in my neighborhood, which on the other side of the scale, I'm like too much information. But I think there's an interesting narrative specifically that I've seen floating around in like people who move to a new city and then they're like, what does this city offer me? And if that is not being offered in the way they imagine, they're like, I hate this city. And there's not necessarily, and this kind of speaks to the second question here around like, what am I giving to this city neighborhood, and what that could look like is just awareness, right? You being aware that that new building that's going to block the trees of that are outside your apartment is going up, and you as a community member have an actual say in that. That is give and take. It doesn't have to be, again, person to person. It can be person to community, person to business, person to park, person to tree. I have a tree that I had to write a petition to be like, don't take this tree down. I like that tree. That was important to me as someone who lives in that space to also have that there for other folks as well. And so I love that you brought that up, because I think, again, community is so vast and so nuanced as to what that means to you. And the question becomes, again, how open are you to receiving it back the other way?
Agreed. On John, I think you're going to be our last comment here. Also, correct me if I did not pronounce your name right. Apologies in advance. And then we are going to switch to the Q&A portion.
Cool. Yeah, it's pronounced Anjan, but I appreciate you asking. Yeah, I love this presentation and all these questions. I think about I also love JR, your response about removing barriers. I think that's a really interesting and important point. Like I myself have I live in Philly, and I've gotten more comfortable kind of hanging out on my stoop, and just like that's been a place that people just by like people being familiarized with my face. A lot of the people that I'm neighbors with have like lived here for a long time, so my face has been like new to them in this neighborhood. And I think it's not like the first time they see me they're going to be open to talking to me. It's like kind of like takes a moment to kind of acknowledge that. And then the other thing that like when I think about community building, I do a lot of work. I'm part of this collective called Mask that does a lot of work around masculinity and just creating spaces to talk about masculinity. And a lot of conversations, ideas come up around community building and the difficulties that some folks that identify as masculine or were socialized as men experience in building community. just because there's a lot of like internalized things that keep us sometimes from like reaching out and like putting that extra step forward, like that I've noticed some of my peers don't have, like just in terms of like wanting to connect with someone because I think they have a cool vibe or I like their outfit or something. I feel like I've had a lot of interactions with other like mask folks, other people where I've been like, I like this, and like it's a good interaction, but then taking that a step further where it's like, let's initiate us becoming friends, like let's hang out. Like what's your Instagram, like what's your phone number, like that step I feel like has been hard sometimes just because there's a lot of like internal voices that come up that have been like instilled in us. And I think something that would definitely help that is a structure to surround in like a regular meeting space where it's like, I necessarily wouldn't have to be the person to initiate that hangout every single time or initiate that transfer of information, right? But yeah, love the work that y'all are doing. Super excited to see that it's going on.
Thank you, thank you. I also love your name because it has my name in it in like multiple ways. Something I was thinking about. Yes, and yes. Something I think a lot about is how can space initiate relationships? We often think about like, I person must interact with person, but I actually think that the right space brings conversation up in a way that alleviates from both parties. At the Summer Good Space, again, this sort of idea of not being on your devices, one, to JR's point, right? That's a barrier being removed. And now you're sitting in a space and you're like, what book are you reading? And I tell you about the book I'm reading, and you're like, I read this other book. And it kind of naturally creates a conversation in which it's collective, right? Everyone's choosing to be there versus one person being like, hey, I'm issuing this conversation, the other person maybe not wanting to receive it. I think it's tricky. And that's, again, one of the buy-in parts for these other spaces is that they tell us often is like, we have events and people come, but like, how do we make them like actually connect? Like everyone shows up, but then like there's that moment missing. And I think that is the magic of Somewhere Good is we've actually cracked the code and people leave feeling bonded with the other person, not connected. Connecting is like tier one, right? Connection is we're all in the room together. How do you create an actual bond in which I feel like I know you deeply in one singular way, even if that is, I deeply know the origin of your name in a way that like, I don't know anything else about you. And how do you replicate that in an easy way that feels perpetuated by the space and not by the people? And so it's sort of this like magic formula we're still trying to perfect, but we have seen it happen at the Summer Good bedside space in which people of all varied genders and identities have been able to have that connection, which feels really special. So thank you for sharing that.
I think this is a great segue to our Q&A. So Nathan, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Sure. This is more of from an operations standpoint. How do you find your community leaders? Do you incentivize them, and then how do you keep them engaged? How do you motivate them to be on the ground for you?
And you mean community leaders in terms of people who host hangouts, maybe?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to clarify. We don't find them; they find us. I think when you start to objectively look into the options and how people can hang out in their neighborhood, you really don't have a lot of options. I'll name a few that we all probably know. You have Facebook groups, you have meetup.com, you have Eventbrite, you have Instagram. Those are probably the main 4 places in which if I wanted to do something, I would put it out into the world. Between me having the idea of wanting to hang out and it actually happening are a ton of decisions and options I have to make in which most people don't actually do that. And so the offer from Somewhere Good is, we don't even really like to use host language because for us, it's like real hangouts are collectively led. When you hang out with your friends, no one's like, okay, I'm the host of this conversation. I will be leading and guiding it. It's like, we're all here chilling. The conversation's going to start here. It may move there. We may end up putting a puzzle together. and then we're gonna order food. Like it's dynamic. It is dynamic upon the people who spend time there. And so we think of Hangouts as collectively led. And we say that, let's say you said, I'm Nathan, and I want to do a puzzle thing. We'd say it's going to be collectively led. If you have a vision for it, we can create that into it, but it's not necessarily yours. Hangouts incorporate everyone who shows up. So we don't actively look for people, but we ask people to think differently about what it means to hang out in their city, what it means to be with people and bring them together. And in that, people see themselves of like, well, I've never hosted anything, but I've made a hangout. And I think we're trying to bring more people from the I am a professional Eventbrite host. That's on our target market. If that's who you are, you're probably not going to love a summer good hangout. It's just too casual. It's too loosey-goosey. If you have a vision, I always recommend people, I'm like, maybe you should use Eventbrite. Like that might be better for you. I don't know if this is the right platform. And I'm super honest and transparent about that. But for folks who are like, I want to get people together and like do a thing, way better for us. I hope that answered your question. We don't really find people, but we're really clear about what we do and they kind of find us.
I'd say I do something similar in a more smaller audience, and the struggle is finding in a smaller sample set someone who's willing to do it. Thank you.
I know we're at time, but I'm gonna sneak in one more question. CJ, if you do want to unmute yourself and ask.
What's going on? Yeah, man, I'm like thankful for everybody like sharing. This has been like really helpful. Something that came up that was like really helpful is like facilitated by like the space, not by people. Like I'm in a lot of my homies are like organizers and like do a lot of like event hosting, and something that we face a lot is that like, nigga, I'm tired. Like I'm really tired. But shifting from a more collective standpoint is like mad helpful. And the question I had, like, because of that was like something that we've been talking about was like, yo, how to maintain safety in like new ways, right? Like where it's not like necessarily like security guards, or it's not necessarily like on these like people, like how is it like a shared responsibility? So that's like kind of the question, like how are organizers vetted, and like what's the feedback loop if I am if I've attended a hangout, and I'm not necessarily saying like from a malicious standpoint, like, oh, my physical safety was involved, but like, oh, I feel like this this business treated me like a consumer. I feel like this person is selling me something the whole time. I think that's really violent as well. So yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, thank you for that. Again, like it's almost like the way in which we can perpetuate and scale in a way that doesn't water down the product is the use of AI. And so if someone says, hey, I want to create a hangout where I'm selling blankets, we would say, no, like you can't make it. Whereas again, on a Eventbrite or Meetup, they're kind of like, do whatever you want. If that brings you joy, I don't care. And then we would tell them why, unfortunately, you can't make a hangout like that. Hangouts are meant to be collaborative, collective, center around actually, like, would you like us to recommend you something else? If they say yes, we recommend it. If they say, no, I really want to sell my thing, it just doesn't happen. And so we put up a pretty, I'd say, strong barrier in the types of hangouts that we think work best. And in that is a world of opportunity, but also it takes off the labor of hosting, as you mentioned, this idea of like, there should be a thing about this mutual aid fund I know. I don't necessarily need to be the one to like, again, put it all together. A summer good hangout takes about 3 minutes if you're on your phone texting back in a fast manner, and then it's live, and then people discover it and they show up. You don't have to promote it. You don't have to share it anywhere. You just pull up, you're like everybody else. You look at the agenda. Okay, cool. We're going to share names, pronouns while we're here. Cool. The next thing is what mutual aid fund we're talking about. Like it's very, everyone gets to show up without having to feel an onus put upon them. I think in terms of the consumership aspect, this goes back to how we're vetting spaces. It's important for them to think about their space as like, yes, we are a business, we have bills to pay, but also it's equally important that we are a third space in which people can gather. And so the list of spaces starts to shrink a bit. Well, let me take that back. I was actually surprised by how much it didn't shrink. I think when putting that to a business owner where I'm like, we don't force people to buy anything here. You think they're like, well, this call is going to end now, but most people are like, that's fine. Again, if they're coming back all the time, at some point they will spend money. At some point they become community. At some point they know the barista's name. At some point they're invested anyway. And so it's thinking about this long-term aspect of what it means to be in community with space, and not the like, I'm here for a latte, but I can get a latte from anywhere. If you're like, this is my spot, you engender a level of care that I think most people struggle to have with the sort of Instagramification or TikTokification of going to a new place, getting the video, getting the photo, posting it, and then being like, well, I'm not going back there ever again. It's almost like I don't wear my outfit twice, right? It's like, we don't talk about that place anymore. We want to help people build more sustainable practices in which you can show up, and over your entire life, or sorry, your entire experience being spent at that space, you probably spend way more money just because you want to. And there are a lot of spaces who I think are realizing that actually that return customer spending money however they'd like is more valuable than the person who comes once and like leaves a bad review or has no relationship or is rude. And the one other thing I'll note is in the agendas, each space has their own sort of upfront of who they are. And so, walking in, like, for example, Lips Cafe in Flatbush, Lips Cafe is Black owned, it was made here, the owner's name is Jermaine, the baristas are X, Y, and Z, like they are real people who run a real business. They're not just a place to go and eat coffee. It can be. So I think there's a lot of small ways in which we've almost humanized what it means to connect, what it means to gather, and how spaces play a part in that as well.
Right.
One more thing. Is there very specifically, is there like a feedback to be like, yo, this was great?
Oh, yeah.
Is there? Yeah.
Yeah, we send automated feedback throughout the whole process. So once you make the hangout, when people RSVP, they get something after the hangout. We say, how was it? Like everyone, again, communication runs everything. I think without it, you're just building nothing. And then there are obviously community standards and guidelines that we send out that are part of the hangouts as well. And again, if any of you go to summergood.com right now and you click the find hangouts, and you find a hangout and you click it, there's a button that says press for agenda. You can see the agendas. We send them in advance. So you can also see like, what am I getting into? What is this exactly? And you're not just kind of pulling up to be like, oh no, I don't know what's going on. I'm scared. No, I'm not going to talk. Like we want you to come being like, I am ready to do part 3 of the agenda. I'm so hyped and excited. So if anyone wants to look at them now, you can sort of see what I'm talking about in terms of how much we curate the process while being hands-off, but still kind of creating scalable, replicable hangouts that keep everyone as safe as we can make it.
Great. Well, I think that is a good spot to end on. A plug to go check out the website. It was just redesigned, so please go check out www.somewheregood.com. Thank you all for joining. If you did not hear this in the intro, this is our first webinar event. So we are so excited to have you here. The recording will be sent out in an email after, so look for it. I know we had some questions on that, but thank you, Naj. It was such a pleasure.
Of course. I could have talked for another hour, but I won't keep you all here. Thank you so much. Again, if you're in New York City, definitely come by the bedside location. I'd love to meet you. I'm typically there on Fridays, but I'm typically a spy. But if you see my face, obviously say hi. And then Friday through Sunday, 12 to 7, there are various hangouts that are community led. If you'd like to do something, you can do so on our website. It's super easy. Any feedback, always love to hear it as well. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.